So the Big Brother Watch campaign is actually getting even more interesting now when more and more people have got interested in this whole facial recognition and surveillance and the whole lot. Now, it's obvious that Big Brother Watch has associations or tie-ins in their name with Big Brother, the reality TV show Big Brother. I never really liked that show. Never since when it first came out, I didn't like it. Big Brother Watch, the campaign, though, I think primarily associates itself with the 1985 film, or 1984, if I get the date right, where there is a kind of like state authoritarian regime, and it basically spies on the citizens so it can't rise up against it, and it's like called Big Brother is Watching, okay? Probably where Big Brother the TV programme also got the connotation from, I would have thought. Now, I've been following this Big Brother Watch campaign probably since around the pandemic, or maybe just after or just before the pandemic. I can't exactly remember when, but after I found Extinction Rebellion, and then when you actually get into this whole kind of, all these campaigns all sort of are in the similar circles, you find out more of them, and then there are, and now people have got YouTube channels, you got Led by Donkeys, but there are so many. And people have got their own personal channels as well. And there are like loads of people going out protesting now. But still, this whole digital identity agenda, there's still only 3 million people really signed that petition. It's not got 6 million signed to it, but 3 million is quite a lot. But you would have thought that they would have got up to 6 million. I think that one of the main parties, did a lot of ad campaigns to get it to 6 million, because, like, for example, Cambridge, there was about 25,000 people signed, or maybe more, compared to only like 6,000 or 7,000. I think they targeted Cambridge with ads, because you can target an area. I think that's how they did it with the EU petition. That's the petition that's got the most signatures ever. Now, Big Brother Watch has been collecting statements, actual comments from people on their petition that's got about something like 200,000 signed now or something, but they're going to hand it in apparently. I think they were going to hand it in this weekend or this week. Now, this is the thing though, right? They've got this David Davis guy who is on their board, right? And he claims he's against digital ID. So he says, right, and we're supposed to take face value that, he's fully legitimately, obviously, if he's on the board of directors of this Big Brother Watch, right? But he's a Tory, this is the thing. The Lib Dems have got on their website a petition against digital ID, but it doesn't tell you how many people have signed it, which I think is rather strange. I find it, even though the Liberal Democrats are called liberals and they're meant to be for liberty, it would actually be quite ridiculous if they weren't opposing digital ID. But nevertheless, all of the Lib Dems policies and the whole Ed Davey angle on politics, and the fact that he's on the Privy Council and he's a leader of a party and all this, and he's also a knight as well, remember, Sir Ed Davey, would have suggested to me that he was, even though that they claim they're against digital ID, he seems to more closer to people like, Nick Clegg, who was leading the Lib Dems, who was a global Facebook president, and therefore Tony Blair and other people, right? Because all these parties, this is the thing, right? Big Brother Watch don't want this facial recognition software, okay? And they're against the use of all this surveillance, right? But, did they stop the surveillance from being used in the first place without the software on it? This is the thing. And then it ties into the whole having a digital identity and so forth. Now, this is where I'm not too sure whether I trust David Davis MP or not, or Ed Davey, or any of them, the MPs, because it's true, it's very true that Big Brother Watch will say, hey, they rejected digital identity before, so maybe the government, maybe it can be stopped. I think that all of the past attempts were just what you call rocking the boat. Just rock it to get it through, like back and forth. Like if you shake something to break it free, or rock something, get something rocking backwards and forwards to get it rolling, or something like that, right? And I think they're just nudges, because the thing is this, right? It's very clear and it's very apparent that it's not just the fact of the government introducing a digital identity. It's everything they've been doing. All of the different things that they have been doing are a part of this, like the social media and everyone having a video on their mobile phone, and then the surveillance without the software on it, and the whole thing that China is under all this governance regime, which we all find ridiculous and complete violation of freedom and liberty, right? But it exists. It's there. No one stopped that, and no other foreign country is trying to intervene in it, right? Now, because I think they're assembling this piece by piece, and I've done another video about how they're actually violating the Human Rights Act, these big platforms, because they're all coming from other countries, from America, and they do it through a policy. And they say there's no laws to protect us from it, but there actually is, because there's the Human Rights Act, and all these policies and all this spyware and surveillance and Trojans, which they legitimately claim that we consented to, and then they sell it off to private companies, data companies, and so forth. All that was done from overseas, originating businesses and policies, and our government hasn't stopped them, but yet the Human Rights Act 1998 is meant to stop them. For that reason, and also I know that the main parties are cheating in the election campaigns for sure, while at the same time suppressing, blocking, and letting the platforms remove our content without backing us up or supporting us. I know that what they're building this thing like you build a building or a construction plan or a development, and a digital ID part of it, getting it through the government, is only just a small part of it. And all of the other stuff is been going full steam ahead. So I don't know how Big Brother Watch can say that, oh yeah, David Davis is completely against digital ID and he's fully behind us, and Ed Davis opposes it and all this, right? When these people are actually part of the people who've been in the previous governments, who've been laying the foundations and constructing all the other parts and sitting back really and letting all the rest of it come in. And David Davis hasn't really done anything to stop all the rest of it and all the social media violations, which I know there are social media violations. David Davis MP is not helping people out with their legal rights and privileges claims or anything else. Now, the situation that we're in now is that alarm bells are definitely ringing, and there are all these YouTube channels. You've got like Paul Thorpe, he's just one example, right? And then you've got that Liam guy with the bald head, right? And then you've got Ben Habib, just loads of individuals who've got like their big YouTube channels, their name, and they have guests on, and they go on all these other different channels, and everyone goes on each other's channel. But then you've got like Good Law Project and all these other, you got that Matt Kennard, and Double Down News and all these. There are so many branches now converging, and yet the mainstream TV does not really want to accept or go along with this narrative, right? But it's clear now that there is an issue. There's a problem, and we know what it is. It's like they want us to have this regimed governance like in China, right? Because it already exists, it's there. We know that they want us to have that here. But this is the thing, right? As I've said in the other videos, you can't really have that with the Human Rights Act. None of those human rights clauses mean anything if you have this kind of like 24-hour surveillance life where you're punished if you don't behave or say the right thing at any given time or moment, and then you're not allowed to use the right to work or the right to actually buy something. There's lots of different aspects to this. Like when you go online now, like on websites, not just the main websites like Facebook, YouTube, but like on Fiverr, when you're buying things, people are just blocking you from commerce, right? If that was a type of behaviour and conduct, like when you went out in town, you would be blocked from going into shops. But that's what they kind of want people to do anyway. But from a government point of view, not even the sellers. And then you've got all these, there's a lot of women, or maybe men as well, but there's a woman just put a petition into the Scottish Parliament, but even though the Scottish Parliament are now saying that they're not accepting any more petitions for the rest of the year, right? For non-contact sexual offences. How ridiculous is that? If you haven't had any contact with someone, how can you have done anything to them, right? You know? But there are all these weird and strange offences which, you know, a lot of them, those human rights articles which have freedom of expression and freedom of speech, you can't have it, because what freedom of expression and freedom of speech means is freedom. You either have it or you don't. They're using these articles to say that, you know, they want it, right? They ultimately having it. So, look, right, if you've got a person or a family or anything, and how people are moving towards their attitude now is that if any other person does absolutely anything at all which insults or offends a person, not in law, which like offends them in their person or opinion, right? Not anything set in legislation, law, or policy. Just like if they are offended by it or feel injured or harmed, they should be able to prosecute them, right? They're putting laws through now that literally absolutely anything could upset or offend someone, right? But that is the absolute anti-opposite to other people having the freedom of speech and to express themselves, you know? So where do you draw the line? Well, the thing is, I don't think those articles did draw the line. Those articles actually said that a person can express themselves how they want, or speak freely how they want to express themselves. But these woke or kind of like new, kind of like just ridiculous people actually really want to be able to block, ban, ignore, and even prosecute someone just for absolutely anything that they personally themselves are offended by or don't like, right? That's how they want to go, which is that the other person does not have any freedom of expression or speech, you know, because absolutely anything that the other person suddenly doesn't like. When you start enforcing these things through these policy buttons and blocks and bans, you get used to thinking that, well, it's an authority. You've got a personal authority, which isn't the law of the country, right? So if any other person says or does something which is not a crime, and there is not legislation to say that it's illegal, the platforms have been giving people the power themselves to enforce socially in groups or about to basically what is effectively punish them or remove them. That is an exercising a statutory power or authority effectively, but the platform gives you it, right? It's not been given by the government in legislation. It's not a democratic power. It's actually a corporate power. It is a business corporate power put into the social fabric of the country, which gives a company or private business has given you a statutory power, so you can enforce it against any other person, including when they're with groups of people, and they can even stop you from talking to other people in a group, right? But yet they haven't broken a law. That is actually alarming when you're meant to have the Public Meeting Act 1908, which prevents them from doing that, and it hasn't been enforced on the platforms. And that's why the Facebook and YouTube, I think, have been acting illegally, because they've been violating that Public Meeting Act quite a lot, right? But what it's done is it's given a lot of people and persons power. But it's not the government didn't give them that power, and the other voters and electors didn't give them it. It's not being put into the country democratically. Mark Zuckerberg came along, and like Sergey Brin and Google and YouTube, and they gave that person that power, and no one voted for it. And when that person gets used to using that power, they like it, and then what you do is you get very, very intolerant of the more and more things that you can easily block out that you don't like, which before you might have tolerated or been used to. You're actually You're becoming extremely intolerant, right? And then you start saying that, you want it put through the law of the country, you want it made into law, right? You want it to be legislation, and then you want it to be made into democratic power, right? And, but those are the powers that the government actually want, because there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy up is that Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin and Google and the government ultimately want that power themselves, right? They want that power, but they want it not at an equal level to us, like if you're just an admin in a Facebook group or a member of a Facebook group or just got a page, right? They want it for the whole country. And those powers, those platforms didn't get through democratic legislation. Not in England. In America, they've got this Section 230 of the Online Decency Act, which supposedly gives them the power to remove democratically protected material, right? And in America, they do not have the Human Rights Act, and they don't have the Public Meeting Act 1908 as well, right? And I can reel off many other acts we've got in England, like the obscene publications, for charities and things like that, right? So the Americans actually do not have all these laws, but they built these huge platforms in their own country, and they imported them into England. They've got this reach, and they got everyone in England to join and sign up, but actually they're against the European Convention of Human Rights. And this is where I come into it with Big Brother Watch, right? Because this is what I want to say to Big Brother Watch, right? And Big Brother Watch knows a lot more than me, right? Because they've done loads of investigations. They know all about the facial recognition technology, the usage of it, the police and so forth. And, obviously they know about the Big Brother program and about, the movie, and they know all the innuendos and tie-ins and everything like that. But I need to say, for me, right, from a person who was, I knew there was something wrong, with the police when I investigated illegal road signage. So my approach is that, the authorities are corrupt, and the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts and the government, right? Big Brother Watch is like that the government are doing this plan or strategy to do with, basically it's like the China model governance, right? They're wanting, look, to cut the long story short for Big Brother Watch, right? Basically, essentially, for us to all sum it up now, I think it's better just to say, look, here's what's happened to the Chinese government and how they run their country, and they want to run England like that, right? And we don't want them to. And they're doing all these gradual processes, and this is one of those processes which they're doing, and Big Brother Watch are opposing it, right? Or opposing a lot of those processes. But what I'd say to Big Brother Watch is that, Facebook and YouTube are part of that. And so is, the mobile phone that we've got in our hand. Because ultimately the mobile phone is, when you create a Facebook profile, and the BBC told everyone to go onto Facebook, you have created a digital identity of yourself on Facebook, on a website, and then you interact with other people on it, right? The BBC did that. They told me when I was out on the radio that this was the latest thing and I should go do it, and then everyone started doing it. I know that is a true fact, right? So that's part of it. Because if I never, if that Facebook site wouldn't have happened, then we'd all just be on hobby forums. There were forums, there were groups and forums, where you go and chat, but it wasn't like it was just like an interest group which you just signed up to it and put a little picture and made up a fake name and just chatted to people about stuff you're interested in. You could put your real name on there, but it wasn't anywhere near the same thing, right? Now we know that Bill Gates is tied into this as well, but Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin, they were doing separate things like just a search engine, but now it turns out Sergey Brin isn't just doing a search engine, which, he's like an index, like the Yellow Pages online. No, he wants to take over the world, and he's doing protein synthesis, alphabet, and he's literally turned into an absolute maniac, right? And he wants everyone to be using his software. He's put Google, they're scanning every single book in existence into digital, and that it has Google embedded into it. So, like, you know, if something happened to the planet and there's, you know, some, you know, future civilization or future aliens or God knows what finds Earth, right, and finds all the archives, the history of England will have Google embedded on it, like that. You've got to be insane, you know, to want to do it. You know, who would? There's something tacky or just it's not stylish to want an objective like, hey, if I get Google on absolutely everything, right, then that would be great. No, it wouldn't. Surely, right? There are words we've got like obsessive. You get these sexual offenders in and they call them, you know, obsessive or perverse or whatever. Why is it these business people? Why is it these big corporate entities and these big empires and these, you know, why don't we say, oh, they're obsessed with money? Why can't you go into a court and say, you know, money's all right, you know, you can buy things with it and you can run a business and you can make a bit of profits, but these people are obsessed with it, or they've got some kind of fetish with money or something like that, you know. Why do they want to be spying on people? When these people are doing these particular behaviours and habits, right, it's like it's not normal to want, right, if you had a guy in court, right, who was going around, you know, he had like a stamp or something or something, and he was going around, we walked around like with an ink stamp, stamping his company on everything. He was walking around stamping it on people's windows, doors, whatever. They'd say that there was something wrong with him, like he was not right in the head, he's mentally unstable. Why aren't they saying, why does this Sergey Brin want Google on everything? Isn't there a psychological problem there, a mental defect? Isn't he like insane or cognitively defective, or he's got problems, right? If you want to make loads of money, if your objective is making money and you've got billions, you know, you immediately apparently have got a license to do what you want, you know? Maybe like, you know, you know, some of these, what was that? I'm trying to think of that racing driver who went down to that weird cellar and was doing weird sex fetish stuff, you know. So it's like, but what about Hunter Biden? What about, you know, Biden's son, Hunter Biden? You know, he was doing loads of weird stuff. So, you know, but anyway, I don't think it's normal. But the thing is, trying to come back to the government and the MPs now, right? They're doing this thing and they're all in on it. I don't buy that David Davis MP is against or opposed to it, or Ed Davey, because they're actually using social media and engaging it. Now, this is where Big Brother Watch will disagree with me, and this is where Big Brother Watch doesn't think that I'm right, okay? Now, I've never liked that Big Brother programme, and I don't like, you know, Strictly or all these mainstream TV things, you know. I don't think they're good for social life. Now, Big Brother Watch, for sure, certainly thinks that, you know, if you've got a handicap or a problem or a disability, you know, social disability, then, you know, there's something wrong with you, right? Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have public meetings, or you shouldn't, you know, go on news programs, or you shouldn't go on chat shows, or you shouldn't do this or that, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, like, you know, because obviously you can't do anything or be a success if you don't. But there is a element, right, in this where, and I think it comes down to Big Brother. Now, before the year 2000, before all this social media and before all the mobile phones and smartphones, right, look, if you've got friends, right, if you've got friends and you go out with them and you go to the pub and, you know, you go on holiday or you go to watch music shows, festivals, Glastonbury, maybe you do go to a TV studio and be in a studio audience, I don't know. maybe you're into crafts, maybe you like go to heritage sites, maybe you go to painting classes. There are loads of different things you can do in life, right? Not everyone wants to be on TV or go on game shows, and not everyone, wants to be a celebrity, right? They even have that show, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, right? But when it comes to Tony Blair and digital ID, he and all these, elite people have been planning something. And it's not just a matter of, hey, there's these mobile phones, and then they invented the mobile phones, and then they invented, mobile phones with a camera, and then they invented mobile phones with a video, and then they invented a mobile phone that's a computer, right? And it just happened to be these mobile phone companies working on it, and they were just making progress, and they were just up to their own devices, right? And then there just happens to be Mark Zuckerberg, and there just happens to be the search engine Google. The way that Big Brother Watch seems to be approaching it at the moment is that, okay, we're just opposing this digital identity and this facial recognition software, right? And the use of these cameras, with this software. But they didn't actually oppose security or surveillance generally, or, fences around schools or whatever, or they didn't oppose Facebook and YouTube, right? They actually used Facebook and YouTube to promote their cause, right? Now, this is the thing. Because this Chinese government has done this thing where it's implemented all this model to run the whole country, China, and it's based on this principle and this whole behaviour and, people being videoed, spied on, watched, and they've got they're not allowed to go certain places and all this weird stuff, right? That's huge. It's massive. It takes long-term planning and it takes long-term strategy. And they've also got to get it through the government and past the people anyway. So it's massive, right? It's huge. Now, therefore, if our MPs and government, right, have got any vague plan or strategy, or more than a vague plan and strategy, because it's a solid plan of Tony Blair's, right? That's where they seem to be going with it, or wanted to go with it, because it actually exists somewhere already now, right? And it seems to be like Big Brother Watch, they seem to have popped up and become relevant when it's we're already halfway sort of through the process going towards China, because we've got all these things, all these mobile phones, and they're making you accept, consent, all these rules which have all this data on you, which then the government clearly can use if they apply law to it for governance for that model, right? Now, the day on the I don't want to kind of lose the relevance here, right? The Big Brother reality TV program apparently started in the Netherlands in 1999, right? So we're talking 1999 and 2000, and then they had a British one, right? Now, I think that's significant. The year 2000, right, is significant because when I check now, the first proper kind of phones with cameras or video on came around in 1999 to 2000, right? Which is when that Big Brother show appeared. So the capability to record video, everyone recording video in the palm of their hand, and taking photos en masse with storage, arose at the same time as this Big Brother program, right? Now, the ideology behind Big Brother, now, I've never talked about this before, and I know that it's obvious. It's like when you see the Big Brother Watch campaign, it's kind of self-explanatory, and it's just you should intuit this, right? The thing is that the idea behind the Big Brother program, the model behind it, the basis behind it, the principle and the ideology behind it is that you've got a lot of people in a house and they're all under surveillance, right? And they're all being watched. Now, this is the thing, right? And I think this is, I don't really want to stress how important, you can't stress how important this is. And, you know, maybe Big Brother Watch already know this, but the deeper meaning and the deeper understanding of it is more important, right? The timing of it, the year 1999 to 2000, and you've got Big Brother. In England, we had the Human Rights Act 1998. Okay, that was our law in England, which brought in all this ECHR, European Convention of Human Rights, into the English law, okay? The European Convention of Human Rights has the right to privacy in family life, okay? Now, don't you think that it's rather significant or completely relevant, and if not absolutely bang on target, that when you enact laws which say that everyone in their own house really or family has got a right to privacy, and they make a special article about it in the law, but at the same time they introduce a TV program which is absolutely completely and 100% full on in complete and utter contravention of that, and totally the flip side of it. Because in that Big Brother program, you don't have any privacy at all in the house when you're being surveillanced, right? And that show arose following the articles on privacy in the Act. But the thing with that show is this: Big Brother was put on the mainstream TV in England and shown to the whole country, the whole nation, and they really got people into it. You know, like they had fans. It was like a huge, you know, like they wanted it to be the biggest thing. You know, like Strictly or whatever, or Coronation Street or whatever. They wanted it to be one of the biggest things. Why would you have, if you just put a law through and the government were really proud of it, and they were really behind it, and they really wanted to enforce it, and one of the primary articles was the right to family and private life, right? And that they wanted to promote that. Why would you have on the mainstream TV, one of the most popular mainstream shows, that they want all of the, you know, the cool mainstream, you know, people who follow it to get right into it, which was completely and utterly and totally against that article, because it was all about watching people and spying on people and knowing what they're up to and not having any privacy at all in a house, right? And they wanted people to like it and think it was a good thing, but yet the Act suggests that it's not a good thing, and that you know, you got a right to it, but then what they do is they introduce to go completely the other way, right, with the program. And then at the same time, we're not talking like, you know, 1985, we're not talking like 1994, we're not talking about 2008, we're talking about that time, that moment, 1999 to 2000, when this Big Brother comes out, and they've just done the Human Rights Act for privacy in your own home. Then these companies who have been doing these mobile phones with text messages then release cameras so everyone can film everything themselves and record stuff and take photos with the computer on. And to add to it, 1999, 2000, and then shortly after 2005-06, you've got the BBC say to everyone, why don't you get a digital identity and make it on the computer and make like digital profile, and YouTube pops up, and they get everyone to go on this, and then these companies who are all coming in from America who don't have that human rights law for privacy are forcing us to submit content and accept to give up our privacy, and also then collecting data and selling it to third parties, and China and TikTok as well. So you've got the mainstream TV putting a psychological narrative completely against the act of law that's just been made, and then you get all these mobile phone companies at the same time just after drop this tech, and then they bring in Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, and whoever else, YouTube, and then their policies are to give up all those privacies and rights. But yeah, you've got protection from it in this country, but in their own countries they don't have that, right? So you've got all the tech, the companies and everything is going against the principles of the law, which was just made, right? Which is why I don't think that they ever intended it. And those articles are so vague now, which is that then you get all these, and then those platforms end up giving these citizens these they're not statutory powers in law, they give them these, I'll call them corporate powers. The corporate business entities start running social life, right? Not your work life, and giving powers to people. And people start liking these powers and enjoying them and using them over citizens. And then they get sort of carried away with these powers. And then whenever anyone's annoying them or they're wanting to actually get it put through the law, then like people aren't allowed to look at them funny or whatever, or sexually, or whatever, even though you've got all these women on TV who are putting makeup on and stuff like that, right? Wanting people to find them attractive and so forth. But I've just done a write-up thing about children aren't sexually active until puberty. They don't interpret sexuality. Anything to do with touching or closeness, physical stuff, is usually seen as love, right? It's interpreted as children as if someone touches someone or hugs them, it's usually that they like them or love them, right? It's kindness, right? But after puberty, then you got the additional sexual aspects to it. There's a lot of things to talk about on that, and that's another discussion, right? But so everything is completely and totally. What they're actually doing is going against what they put through the law and saying, and the powers they're giving to people and all these policies of these big companies is also going against it anyway. But they're all coming in from outside of Europe, right? And then China, right? China has now gone full on to this plan. But they never had the protection of the European human rights. But now we're getting it in this Australia, we're going this way, like, you've got to have ID to even search the internet, right? So how I see it now, in my opinion, is that I think that you see, if they did all these things, we wouldn't actually accept or put up with that, China model. We wouldn't accept it because, people think that it's stalking or spying or whatever, right? And it's all to do with this, like, Eurovision connotation, this kind of like, do you really know what's going on? Do you really know what's the big picture, what's happening, are you with it or whatever, and so forth. And obviously, I think that maybe the Europeans are the people that would be that most difficult or hardest on Earth, on planet Earth. And I'm not going to say England or Great Britain. I'll say, like, Europe, to get it past us, right? Because we'd say, just a minute, hey, we call them out on it. So, like, there's something with the Human Rights Act and those articles whereby they made out we were going to have all these protections, but then they immediately went against them. One of the main offenders is America. Now, in America, though, they're really proud of their democratic rights, and they're really proud of, freedom of speech and so forth. So how do they manage to get these platforms with all these rules and so forth in America, if America is meant to be so big on their constitution and rights? Well, this is the thing. I don't think America clearly knew what was going on. That 1996 Online Decency Act, which says that you can take down constitutionally protected material. I don't know how they got that through. That, to me, that was the fall of America, right? Now, I know that Americans, there were loads of arguments around constitutional rights, but that's a big one because the internet has become the primary form of communication more than the newspapers or telephone, right? So surely for Americans to allow their main priority communication to have the constitutional right diminished or taken away is quite insane, really. I mean, what if they did that to the telephone in America? There's a lot of people in America hang up on each other a lot more than in England, but it's becoming more common now in England, I think, and the government and agencies when you're talking to them, as well. But that Section 230 is insanely ridiculous. Now, fair enough, if you've got a massive big company and you're not wanting loads and loads and loads of people to sue you, but, there are certain things which people have a right to do because they're important or more important than other things, and that's why freedom of the press, the right to access the press. Otherwise, only certain people can access the press, and then they'll have their influence, and then they take control. Which is like everyone's meant to be able to participate in politics in Parliament. That's what John Pym said. Even most unsavoury people have a right to participate in Parliament. And I think the Americans misunderstand their constitutional rights anyway, because it's meant to be for the democratic process that their Bill of Rights, it's not the media don't have any more rights than anyone else. It's the fact that everyone's got the right to use the media, right? Because if they're excluded, they can't engage in politics. If you're excluded from the platforms, and if the platform is the main form of communication, you can't engage in it. Now, that's what they're trying to do with us now, like China. If you misbehave or if you're naughty, you're not allowed to do these certain things. That goes totally against the principle of John Pym, what he said that, even the most unsavoury people can participate in Parliament, right? And how the country should be run, which is not what David Cameron believed in when he wanted to take away the vote of the prisoners and so forth. So, what I'm saying is, if you've not got the main point is this. That Big Brother programme actually was significant, and maybe you should figure that out when you actually see the Big Brother Watch campaign and their logo and their whole kind of like package and everything. You should kind of like have an intuition on that. But looking at the date of it, the thing with Big Brother Watch, what I think they've missed out on is that they keep going on about, we haven't got any laws or safeguards for this software. There's no regulation for it or so forth, so forth. It's actually not, that's not the point. The point is that now I've realised, because I didn't even know about China. I didn't know what the hell's going on in China until I've been following all these groups and, been told, what's going on and so forth, right? So, the Human Rights Act 1998 is absolutely at the centre of all this. It's one of the main things in all of this, right? It's got absolutely everything to do with it, because these people who want us to end up like China, they can't have that act because it would prevent them from having that government, right? And form of governance. You can't have a government with that because you don't have any privacy, or right to freedom of expression or speech at all. Anything that you say that upsets either the government or any other person, they're making up laws so that they want it so that if anyone annoys anyone else in the slightest or for anything, right? I mean, there's no point having all these different acts. You might as well just have one law I don't know why these Tony Blair people even want separate acts of law, because they just want it so, if you say something another person doesn't like, you don't need a legislation, you just block them or ban them, right, like you do on social media, or like on Fiverr site, right, which is how the government want to treat us, which is what Canada are putting through now. Now, that's how YouTube operate with their channels, right? That's how we get treated by YouTube. Now, there's no arguing with them. They supposedly give you a right to appeal, but it's a joke appeal. They don't take it seriously. Their policies are extremely vague, right? Extremely vague. You can't really get into court with them because they're just purely enforce it on policy, right? And no one ever votes for any of those policies or the things. So it's a regime which has come in with complete and total enforcement. It actually gets a lot of the citizens to kind of like a lot of the privileges that it gives, and yet it's very antisocial and very unfair, and you don't get this like cut off fair trial or anything like that, and no one voted for the rules in the first place, right? It's just a matter of anything that you take of offence with that you can just, block, ban or whatever them, right? And that's how the government want to be able to treat us, and then you don't really have a proper vote or say in anything. In fact, you'll end up like David Cameron saying, if you penalise prisoners, they don't have a right to vote. Well, apparently if you've got no social points, you don't have a right. They don't want you to have a right to travel or buy things or work or anything, right? But the way they've done it, the Americans brought it in. The Americans have attacked us with the social media, and the all these Japanese, Tokyo, Samsung, they apply. Notice, right? It's the China, Japan, the Far East, Tokyo, Shanghai, whatever. All these Samsung, Huawei, all the tech, the digital technology, all the devices are all made in China and Japan. They're all made in the Orient, right? So the techs come in, from the Orient, and then the actual platforms, but TikTok's from the Orient, the platforms are from America, and they've all come in, and the BBC and the British government said that it was okay, that it was good, but they're all against the right to privacy. And it's private companies which are taking it over after Tony Blair said, oh yeah, freedom of information should be free, but we're not allowed to have freedom of information about these companies, and they don't want to tell us anything, right? They don't want us to know anything about them. We're not allowed to know any details or information about the companies or who you're dealing with when you're dealing with someone, right? So it's a little bit like, they did this Human Rights Act, and then the TV producers went completely against it and said, hey, we'd like to have a show that's completely, no privacy at all, right? Well, the government actually, that's what the social media platforms did. So the government are like, hey, we've got this new law, the Human Rights Act, we've got complete and total freedoms and stuff, and you've got a right to you've got all this privacy, right? But immediately, massive TV campaign with Big Brother, which is totally against it, and then the social media are all coming from foreign countries and getting to give up all the privacy and everything as well, and not tolerate anything if you don't like it, and so forth. So they were immediately going against it, but it's all mainly coming in from outside Europe. So I don't know why any of the MPs even believe they were for it. Anyway, and then the MPs are going on there and getting loads of publicity and mixing it with their parliament websites and pages and that, while these foreign entities and countries are taking all our content down. Now, Big Brother Watch did investigate that during the pandemic. There were some things getting taken down, right? But it was about Americans taking English things down and the English government taking American things down, which is rather strange and unusual. Now, with that, there's a problem. It's Parliament who are responsible for our democratic rights here in England. They're meant to enforce it. They're meant to look after us. You can get a remedy in the courts, but when someone violates those rights, it's actually a contempt of Parliament, and it's meant to be Parliament's responsibility to protect you and punish the other person. But they're not doing. And the thing with this whole process is you don't end up in the courts, right? Because they're using policy. So you don't get to the courts. They're bypassing the courts, right? They're just using this overseas kind of like enforcement power, right? Now, our government are not supporting or helping our online content, which is democratically protected. That American Section 230 does not and cannot apply in England, right? They're not punishing the platforms. They're not even getting the stuff put back up, and loads of people's pages are getting taken down. So our government, Parliament, are failing our democratic rights for us and our independent democratic power, while they themselves are abusing and getting away, and these platforms are letting them overuse those online platforms for the main parties in themselves to get them elected into parliament, right? And they're putting election material up and they're mixing it with their parliament stuff and leaving it up, and it's having an influence. So that's how Reform UK has exploded and got so big, right? And then you get all the Talking Pints programmes that Nigel Farage did to get extra popularity, with Tice and Lee Anderson. Now, this is the thing. Now, what's happening is that people are all now doing their own independent campaigns and making videos and doing groups to try oppose this China government plan, which is obvious, right? Because and part of this facial recognition is just part of it, right? They're halfway through trying to turn us into the China model. Now, that's just the obvious fact, right? Now, in order to beat them and defeat them, we need to be able to use these tools on social media. But we've signed up and given away our privacy to them and third parties and businesses, and it's the big businesses who want to make us like China so they can make even more money out of us. And these big businesses who are now using our information to actually spy on us, study us, and strategically defeat us, and use these stupid adverts and all this, sending adverts at you of things you've just been looking at, and it's massive psychological fuck over, right? They shouldn't know any of that information or have any of it, right? But also the police are our campaigns, our social media content, our protests, our demonstrations, and all that is meant to be completely and totally protected, right? But the police don't like it because the police like having a uniform and the police like having powers. That's why they do the job, right? But the thing is, they're usually going after these criminals, right? And a lot of the police are confused because the police, right, they've got the uniform, like they went to police college, they did all this training and they get the job, and then they get confused, like, why should these other people have the powers, right? We're the ones who are, over normal criminals. We're doing politics now and the fate of the whole country and the fate of the civilization of mankind. So the police are a bit confused because they need to wake up and say, like, this is not local crime, right? This is not crime. This is like, oh, fuck, what's going to happen to mankind? So it's like, it's above the level of a police college, a uniform, right, and a truncheon, right? That's for walking the local beat and people robbing banks and kicking people in the testicles, right, or whatever the fuck they're doing. This is like serious. This is like, oh fucking God, oh motherfuck, what the fuck is going to happen to the fate of mankind on Earth, this country? And this is kind of like what Extinction Rebellion have been like, and why a police kind of didn't take it seriously, right? Because they didn't think it was going to be the end of the world or anything. But the police also like authoritarian regimes, particularly when they've got the power and they can boss people around, which is why, they like all these ideas of more cameras and more surveillance, Now, what's happening now is that there's a lot of misinformation going around about the law because the government don't want us to have they don't want to be democratically accountable to us, not directly, because then we can tell them what to do. Now, the main political parties, Labour and Conservative and the Lib Dems, they got elected and they're not messing around. It's like, we went to the trouble to get elected and we've got these big parties and we want to get our business through Parliament, right? Yet, you can't vote for a party because if you don't have a person, a party, you can't, if there are no humans, right, you can't have a political party running anything because a political party is not a living being, right? You have to have a human person. You vote for a human person, right, who you speak to with issues and they go represent them in Parliament, right? If you didn't have a candidate, you can't have a party. So the party's nothing, right? Now, these main parties want to go into Parliament and get their business through. And that it seems that business, or a primary large part of it now, is to end up like China, right? That's clear. And we don't want to do that. We want to stop them, right? Now, we need to use all the social media protest demonstrations and rights to stop them doing that, right? And maybe even get some of those persons out of the government, which were allowed, they're democratically accountable to us. They're criminally accountable to the police, but but they're also democratically accountable to us, even if they don't have to have committed a crime. We can remove them if they're not doing what we ask them to do, right? And this is what MPs don't like, right? Now, the thing is that there's a hell of a lot of media flying around now. Every person, this is what that Liam guy just said on his channel, right? He was just taking part in the protest. Every person now is kind of like their own journalist or doing journalism if they're going to try and oppose this. And they're meant to be protected, not under journalism law, because it's parliamentary, it's democratic, right? Now, whenever the police are doing something unlawful or breaking the law, but it gets filmed and we don't call them out on it, or it makes it look like the police are allowed to do it, that is spreading propaganda. Because when people are getting arrested illegally and unlawfully, but it passes off as that the police are allowed to do it or can do it, or they can put these section 42s down or whatever, it's leading the public to believe that the police have got powers or the police have got the right when they don't, right? And when the police are intervening or preventing our advertisements or our promotional things, right, they're actually obstructing the cause of the campaign. And when other people see it and they're scared to go out because they think they might get arrested, that's actually deterring you from a campaign. And it's actually putting you off. It might even be obstructing it, right? Now, that's also a contempt and illegal. So we've got a very big problem now with the police actually... When the police now are acting illegally in contempt, they're also doing massive amounts of propaganda because they're frightening the whole country and they're diminishing the power of the voters in the whole country to make them think they don't have powers, and it makes the police think that they're in charge when they're not. The police are meant to be elected originally and they're meant to answer to us, right, democratically. The police answer to us democratically. We only answer to the police criminally. But when we are acting democratically, we're not criminally accountable, right? And we can't be criminally accountable. So, and the police, many police officers are confused about this and what their position in society is now when you have a massive, huge national emergency or national alarming uprising, because the role of the police is criminal, right? It's not democratic, except they're meant to look after some electoral processes, but they're meant to be under Parliament. All the electoral processes are meant to be a parliamentary process, right? All those acts of law really are relatively new. And it's only to challenge the election, right? Challenging the election is meant to be done by the voters anyway, right? The police have got a role to regulate elections, but they're not even doing that job properly. Now, also, the problem is we've got some really big media companies who are getting more attention than all of this other stuff that's happening, and they're managing to convince large parts of the country that there is no problem, that there's nothing wrong, or that even that we should do that China government. And also, there's a lot of people getting distracted still by entertainment, by game shows, by Big Brother program, by Strictly, all this bullshit. That there are more important and more serious things going on than that, but those shows are still continuing. Like, that's the only point in being alive or living, is for entertainment or to be entertained. When there's the least people until we get this sorted out and get this over, right, all of that is defeating the object, right, and distracting people from the object. And really, those main channels now are really fighting for audience as well. They're fighting for audience, and you know, they all seem to be going along with this idea that the government, wanted to do, because it was the BBC who suggested Facebook, and it was, the big television studios and program who dropped in Big Brother Watch, right? And they like tech, they like things, and then they've got all their advertisers who go on there. They make all their money from the advertisers, selling mobile phones, all this tech that's coming in from China, and all the gadgets and so forth, and that. So in a way, they're all kind of like, they like all the tech and entertainment stuff anyway, which not all of it is very healthy for society. So, and look at what they did with the food as well. Let's not forget that. All of the food and health issues as well. We've got that problem, which was, and we know that the way that the health of the country was going was very, very, very bad, and that all these fast food places were not very good, and a lot of it was severely affecting health detrimentally. Maybe even affecting people cognitively. So maybe they put that money. You see, I'll throw this in as well at this point, because I guess this is kind of important in a way, right? I read that Samuel Johnson dictionary. It was telling me about opium and the fact that it was a massive thing in the Middle East, and all the effects of it, and that they grew it in fields like we grew corn, and they took it before they went to battle, and all the negative side effects of it as well, but also the other effects. We've had Christianity in this country for a long time, but there is a model that is, some scientists like Dr. Professor Nutt and people like that, Dr. Carhart, is that we also in this country had our own sacrament. It wasn't just like the Middle East came in with all the opium, whatever. That we actually had some sacraments here in this country, but the Christian church kind of sort of glossed over it, or even tried to eradicate it, right? Which is to do with the whole psilocybin culture. Now, this is fact, right? According to the professors, if we're going to say that we did have a sacrament in this country and it was related to psilocybin, that Professor Nutt says that it works on the most human part of the brain, right? The newest part of the brain, on the serotonin part, right? If you follow that belief system that we did have a sacrament in this country, possibly even a religious one in prehistory, before the Roman Empire took over, and then we had the massive. Because I'm not opposed to Christianity at all. This is just this is like an opinion, right? If we did have a sacrament which was in widespread use, in so much, we know that there's opioids were in huge widespread use in the Middle East, right? But this particular sacrament, if it was one of ours, right? And if it's true, because Muscimol's still legal, right? Those red mushrooms, Amanita muscaria, is to do with works on the sleep system, right? The GABA system, which is what that Professor Nutt's been working on, these new drinks, but as an alcohol alternative, works on the GABA system, right? But the thing with the serotonin drugs and the serotonin, what is the attachments or connotations to the use of the serotonin drugs is usually it encourages or stimulates the type of thinking which makes people look at the big picture, right? What's going on around them, what are other people up to, possibly even maybe not necessarily paranoid thoughts, but how the world works, kind of like philosophical thinking, right? But also thinking outside of the box, this is the type of thinking that you attribute to Terence McKenna or Graham Hancock, or even now you've got David Icke and Gareth Icke, that type of thinking. That type of thinking and the way they're looking at the world is not the type of thinking that the mainstream media like. They like a very kind of self-engrossed, gratification-based, sweets, goodies, action, fast-paced things, excitement, drama, all these kind of very materialistic things that they focus on, right? if it's true that the serotonin effect is making people think of, what's going on, or what's happening around them, or what other people are doing or up to, right? As opposed to like focusing on the details or the fine print and so forth. And if it's been illegal and people haven't been doing that, and if that aspect of Europeans has been diminished, also you've got this fast food culture. Now, the fast food culture is very dopamine orientated, but not dopamine like when you've got some amphetamines and cocaine and so forth like that. But it's the dopamine effect from the foods like, Taco Bell and McDonald's and things like that is more of a cloudy effect of the brain, right? Now, if that's the case, if that is true, then it could explain why there's been a dramatic shift or change in the last 1,000 or 2,000 years from a type of thinking that is more aware of what's happening around us and going on to a more clouded or brain fogged state of consciousness, which has been heavily fueled by, like these Taco Bell burritos, which, like a heavily dopamine stimulant, and, all the Subway foods and all that, which have also been making people overweight and harming their metabolism, damaging their metabolism over generations, and that would explain how we've got into this situation where all these things are happening with the mobile phones and the social media and everything else, taking our rights away, and we've ended up in the situation we're in. So it's kind of like, and obviously, China is gone now. It's like it's gone to this governance model, right? But we haven't yet. The Americans are like, they don't have the China governance model, but the Americans' platforms came in and attacked our European convention rights. They've already had their constitution mashed in 1996. I don't know how that one got past them, but they didn't see that one coming. But you see, all that fast food came from America as well, right? So all KFC, McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, all those main big food companies. And remember, in America, they always have, Americans, if you have a cup of tea or coffee with an American, they're like, they have cream on it, they have milk, they have cream, right? And then, so the Americans have been heavily pummeled in the dopamine abuse from the food. And I think that's why they managed to get these acts of law past them, like, this 1996 Online Decency Act and things like that, which take away their constitutional rights. So the Americans are fucking out of it, They still believe in constitutional rights, but they're kind of like a bit zappoed, right? A bit obliterated. And then we have sort of been distracted with this media as well and other things. Not everyone, because not everyone is entranced by the mainstream media. If you've got a life, right? If you have a life, you don't watch TV. This is the thing. If you have a life and if you have friends, you don't watch TV. Now, maybe there might be one show or one or two shows that you really like, right? But they used to be only on 1 or 2 days a week, right? And, the fact is that growing up, you have friends and you have a life. So this is the thing. I don't even know who watches those programs, if they watch it on a Saturday night before they go out or when they get back in or whatever. But, now if that's what you like doing, right? Or what I do in life is watch shit mainstream TV and crap morning TV shows and women's chat shows, right? The standard and the quality and the progression into more and more materialistic pursuits with these women's morning TV shows and the type of foods they're on is just literally obliterate the whole country, which is why we didn't see all this coming, right? And now it's very difficult. Even when people have woke up, even when there's people going protesting and going around, doing demonstrations now, because, like, okay, they know that something's up now, but it's like taking, that much to get them awake to like, get from the distractions, but they're not quite paying attention on the details, right? Like on the actual proper legislation, on the proper law and the proper history, which is what actually gives you your rights and your power, and gives you the priority over the police, and gives you the protections, and then gives you the ability to basically hold these MPs individually, democratically accountable, which they're not been doing at the moment. They're AWOL, right? You got Rachel Reeves as, she's, all they're doing is getting Labour's business through, right? But Parliament wasn't called ever or created to get the business of political parties through. Parliament was created and called firstly and primarily to settle grievances from the public, and that is in the Bill of Rights. Now, that is another thing that Parliament are completely failing and ignoring on. When they're having their own little committee meetings and they're knocking out their committee reports, they're all over this stuff. They're like the Bill of Rights. They're going on about Article 9. They mention it like 50 times in one paper. It's like, they might as well be going into the broom cupboard and, making out with it or something. They're obsessed with it. But they completely and totally ignore and blank the whole rest of the thing, which is like, Parliament is there. It exists for us to settle our grievances for the country, and the MPs to go in and represent us. Its primary purpose is not to get political party business through, right? So when Rachel Reeves is going on about a fucking budget and all this, right, it's not a priority, but she's knocking around like it's the most important thing that there is, right? The Labour Party manifesto is not important when there is a national emergency and not a pandemic. What these parties are doing now actually is the alarm, it is the concern, it is the grudge. The whole country is like in absolute uproar about the business of Labour. In fact, the Labour Party business manifesto is the grievance, right? Now, there are so many processes of Parliament, but they're just lying about them through their teeth because they want to get this business through, right? Now, an election is just simply, they get the votes so we can decide who's going to go represent us in Parliament, right? And when you say call a general election, blah, 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 it's just setting up some polling stations so we can conveniently go in and, vote, and then it's regulated so that it's done properly and it's not cheated, right? But people think that these things are like set in stone, so to say, like, oh, it can only be this, or it has to be this or that, right? Look, right, you've just elected someone to go into Parliament, right? And they're meant to do what we tell them. But the only reason that all those polling stations, had an election is because it was organised so that it would be easy to do and convenient for everyone, right? Now, if the MP is not performing or doing what we want, we can remove them. And you need to get this around your head, right? If you want to walk around and collect signatures, right, you can do that. They're just signatures. But it's a lot more easier and convenient when they've gone and put the polling stations there and got volunteers, right? And they, have it on a specific day, right? If the people want to get the MP removed, they've got to do it themselves, right? The MPs aren't going to do it for them. They're not going to set your polling station up. They're not going to arrange a particular day, and they're not going to hold a general election. You've got to do it. You've got to do the effort to do it, which means that you've got to go around all those houses, you've got to collect all those signatures, and you've got to get more signatures than they got to get in, right? Which is quite a lot. It's a lot of effort, but you can do it. Now, this is the thing, people don't know this, and the MP is not actually going to say, oh yeah, you can remove me if you want, I'll just help you, I'll tell you how to do it. They're lying through their teeth like there's no tomorrow. They're a member of a big party which is trying to get a manifesto and business through, and they're even blocking our petitions and grievances, which is meant to be the main thing that Parliament's there for. The e-petitions, they're not even letting us do them. In fact, they're only allowing through e-petitions recommendations for amending and strengthening the laws, which is what the business of the Labour Party is there for. If the Labour Party is there for business of amending and strengthening the laws, what the fuck is the e-petitions for? It's for grievances. It's for complaining about MPs, because you can't complain about them to the courts, because they're not accountable to the courts, right? Only to other MPs and committees in Parliament, to us, right? Or when we drag them out. Now, you can grab your MP by the ear, like, you know, the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. Now, the people of Lancashire, Chorley, can grab Lindsay Hoyle by the ear oil, pull him out of Parliament, right? That's metaphorical. All you do is you go around Chorley, Blackrod, Lancashire, over there, right? And get the signatures. Knock on the door, get the signature on the paper, send him to Parliament, and you drag him out. This is the thing. The Speaker of Parliament, Lindsay Hoyle, right, is not appointed by the King of England. It's not a royal appointment. We voted for commoners to represent us in the House of Commons. And then those commons who represent us, choose a Speaker. And they grab hold of him. I think it was David Davis MP who grabbed hold of him. And then a woman. In fact, I've got it because I've actually put it in my notepad. I can tell you actually which woman it was. Because I put it in my notepad. Because I'm going to... It was Speaker of the House of Commons on July the 9th, 2024, when he's traditionally dragged to the chair by two MPs. Cat Smith, she was in charge of the petitions committee. She's another person who hasn't got a clue about the history of petitioning, right? And David Davis. So David Davis, the guy who is in charge of Big Brother Watch, is one of the people who grabbed Lindsay Hoyle and put him in the chair, right? Now, this is a thing. Two persons who we literally grabbed hold of them and put them into Parliament, right? Put them into the Parliament through votes. They voted and put Lindsay Hoyle in the chair, right? The Speaker, right? They grabbed hold of him and threw him in the chair, right? Now, this is the thing. So what? If you walk round Blackrod, Lancashire, Chorley, right? And you want to, where there's a will, there's a way, you can go around and get 30,000, whatever, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 signatures. I don't know how many he got. I know how many Starmer got. Starmer got 18,884 signatures, right? And when you go take that box of signatures or paperwork or whatever into Parliament, right, you're dragging Lindsay Hoyle out of the chair. You're dragging him out of the chair, right, by his ear oil or whatever, metaphorically, like the David Davis MP and Cat Smith dragged him into the chair, right? And you can do that. And this is the thing. People they need to be educated and understand. And the MPs are going to lie through the teeth because they're there to do their political party business, right? Hoyle was meant to have, done outstanding work for his electors, right? Well, Labour electors, I doubt he did outstanding work for his independent ones because they're not standing up for our political rights for us, or they're not backing us up with writs of privilege or anything like that when we need them, right? So this is the thing, but people, you can't get people's attention, you can't get them to listen to you or believe you. But now, these people, the citizens of the country, are all going on marches. They're all doing protests. They're all doing demonstrations. But they've got all these fans and followers and they're getting donations thrown at them, money thrown at them. They've got leaders and these leaders are getting popularity. But then you end up with these gurus with all the minions and they're not getting the right knowledge. And these gurus are all talking to each other and there's a lot of misinformation flying around, or they're not getting the right information, and they're also getting misled by Parliament and the police, and they're being messed around. We need to get them educated. They need to be educated and learn something, right? Which is the one thing they're not doing there. Rather than just going out on marches, rather than just going out on protests, they need to actually learn something and read something, right? Because all of this effort, all of these marches, all of these protests, right? Even though they're getting filmed, they're not actually getting the job done. And actually, it's a lot... The amount of effort and the amount of work that's going into all these petitions and protests and demonstrations, actually, they're putting a lot of effort in, and it's only doing a certain amount of publicity, when actually, if they actually knew what they were doing, and if they were properly organised, and if they knew actually what to do, they could actually get their MPs out and get Labour out and get Starmer out like that, if they were intelligent, if they were clever. But the problem is that even when we're not actually trying to vote them out or get them out, even when we're asking them to do something, these MPs, supposedly they got voted in the first place to do what we tell them. When we petition them, they're ignoring them, they're blocking them, they're making up lies and excuses, you know. The Scottish Parliament have just said that they're not going to entertain any more petitions, which is totally scandalous. There's a woman doing a petition on, non-contact sexual offences, which is really ridiculous, right? So I won't be able to oppose that petition with another petition because they're not taking any more. That can't be right. That can't be lawful. If someone puts a petition in, you're allowed to oppose it. They're saying they're not taking any more and not entertaining any more, right? So that's not lawful. The standing orders of Parliament are meant to be the law and rules of Parliament, but the MPs can vote to suspend them, but they've officially got to do it, right? They're making up all these ridiculous policies which totally contradict all the rules. All of the Erskine Maybooks and the Clark's advice is not law, it's just advice. In fact, those standing orders of Parliament and the policy, when the Scottish Parliament, or even Parliament in London, are coming out with all these policies, or just when it's not actually an official standing order, when it's just like they make a declaration or a policy or a statement or whatever, the right for us to put those complaints, those grievances, those petitions in is in law. It's not in the standing orders of Parliament, right? It is in the Observation of Due Process of Law Act 1368, right? That is a law, is a statutory power, right? Parliament cannot come up with a instrument, or the instruments only regulate the processes and procedures which have to be followed. And now they're not even doing standing orders. They're just coming up with these policies like, a couple of MPs came up with a couple of ideas, and they call it a policy, and then they sign it. But they haven't made a law. They haven't enacted a law, and it isn't actually a proper standing order. So what is it? And the Clark's advice isn't law either. Well, they cannot act unlawfully, because even the standing orders of Parliament and so forth have got to all comply with the law. Now, the thing with the Observation of Due Process 1368 is that is a enforceable act of law. It is legislation of this country, and all MPs are bound to act according to law, right? That act says that the community can come together to petition the King, which is His Majesty's government, right? And we know that the King's presence is there with the mace in all of the chambers, even in the local councils, right? So that act of law gives the community the right to petition the King whenever there's a Parliament called, right? So they can't stop you from doing it. Now, if they're saying they're going to ignore and blah, 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 there are standing orders, and those are rules of Parliament which say that when you submit a petition, and if it is in order, which is it's written out properly, it gets put in the journal, right? Now, this is the thing. they're making all these rules up to say that you can't claim this or can't claim that or can't petition about this or that, when that's what it's there for, to complain, right? They're saying you can only propose or make acts of law. That's the amending and strengthening of laws. That's not grievances. They're trying to make e-petitions into alternative, miscellaneous policy which didn't fit with the Labour or Conservatives' own things they want to get through government. Petition... It doesn't matter whether it's paper petitions or e-petitions. It ain't fucking there for amending or strengthening of the law, really. That's just what going to see your MP in surgery is for, right? Or what the parties are already working on or putting private bills. Petitions is illegal claims of anything, right? As long as it's something to do with the government. And it usually is, or else you wouldn't be complaining to the government, like what's happening with, Richard Reeves and the stupid paper mile thing, or... we don't want to end up like China, but you're pushing us that way whether we like it or not, and so forth. Why aren't you upholding the Human Rights Act 1998, right to privacy? Why are you allowing all these platforms to get us to consent to giving up our privacy? Why did you introduce these Japanese Samsung Huawei devices, which are also giving up privacy, and then you want to make it into law and have the government run on that model, right? So they're trying to bring in this... The goal is China, right? But we're not all Chinese, and we're not happy with it, right? We don't want it. So this is the thing. They're trying to block. They're trying to stop us from stopping them from. They're trying to stop us from stopping them, right? And I think now, the best thing you can do is just get them all out. That Michael Westwood's petition had 3 million signatures. It was starting to get towards 10% of each area. If you can get 10% of each area signed, which is a hell of a lot, you're meant to be able to have a recall petition. But if you go further than that and get more signatures than they got to get in, there's no reason why. I mean, if you put a legitimate petition and it's written out properly, and it says, we want this person, this MP out, and all the signatures are from that electoral area, it's legitimate, it's valid. It's a valid claim from that community, from the people who've got a legal right to put someone into Parliament in their area. They've got a legal right to take them out, right? It's democratically accountable. You can do it. This is the thing. So, I don't know how to get people switch onto it, because now everyone's just so distracted and doing their own thing, or being told what to do by people who haven't got the best ideas or whatever. It's getting quite confusing, and then you've got all the entertainment as well on top of it. So that's pretty much it. So is there a conclusion? Well, the conclusion is that Big Brother Watch have sort of got... When I first actually found them, they didn't have that many people following their channel, and there weren't that many people commenting on it. I know they've been going for quite a while, and they've been doing quite a lot of important investigations, quite serious work and serious investigations, but they actually hadn't got that big by that point, and now they've got a lot bigger. The problem is that I don't think David Davis MP is legitimate, because he might have convinced Big Brother Watch that he's totally against digital ID, but all of the rest of the pieces of the puzzle, he's been one of the construction people of it. The Tories have been helping put this all into place. It's a long-term strategy plan, and then all these separate companies, the mobile phone companies aren't just making mobile phones. They're not just doing it by themselves. The fact that the Big Brother Watch is only concentrating on this facial recognition and the use of the cameras and the digital ID, right, it's kind of, in a way, I don't want to say that their work is, I don't want to undermine their work, because I think their work is really positive, right? Obviously, they've done a lot of work, which, I appreciate their work, right? But in a way, it is a little too late, because This whole system, right, is not just the haphazard or random occurrence. It's not the random amalgamation of what happens just when people happen to develop mobile phones with cameras on them all. And it just happened to be that Mark Zuckerberg had platforms with a digital identity, and it just happened that TV did the Big Brother program, which has everyone being observed in houses, right? It wasn't all these separate things which just happened to happen. They were all strategically planned. The government knew they were developing mobile phones. The government knew they were going to have cameras on. The government knew that the TV companies, they got Baron Grade, the Ofcom, and Lord Allen of Hallam. All the television strategy was planned, and the BBC got everyone onto Mark Zuckerberg's social media. And then they got the American platforms. Where was the big English platforms that took off and went out to the world, right? And then the Human Rights Act, they put all these rights in, but they proved, the government wanted to prove that we'll make this law that says that people have got all these rights, and what we'll do is we'll take them all away, and we'll see if we can get away with it, right? We'll see if we can get away with taking away all those rights that we just made, and see if we can get it past them all. We'll see how, we'll give them an MOT. We'll give their Eurovision an MOT, right? We'll give their Eurovision an MOT, see if we can get it past them. And they have, because the government are putting this abortion laws through, assisted suicides, they're getting rid of the right to life. They're doing all these ridiculous things where you can't say this, you can't say that in restaurants, you can't do this, you can't do that. So there isn't freedom of speech and there isn't freedom of expression, right? And now they're taking away the privacy with all these platforms, making you consent to accept to giving you information up. And then Mark Zuckerberg was the one who got you to set it up in the first place, right? So the plan was to make the Human Rights Act and then make it quite vague and then test us all. It was a test. Barristers do tests. They do a legal test. The CPS do a test, right? The test was, can we make up all these rights and establish them all, but make them vague? These are all the things which really, you can't really have all those things if we're going to have the China government we want. Let's see if we can make that act and then get all these things past them. And if we can manage to get it past them without them stopping us, then we've won, right? And they actually have been doing. They have been getting us past us. They've been getting them past us. They've been and they made out, it was going to be old acts of law that took the test, but they're making new ones against it now. So they're actually breaking the law of the Human Rights Act. And the irony of it, the pinnacle of all of it, is that Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer who specialises in the Human Rights Act. Yet he now is leading the Labour and coming out with all these acts of law which completely, totally go against the articles. And he led the CPS, which totally has undermined our constitutional rights when Parliament is meant to be there to uphold them. So you couldn't have a worse person in the history of England than Keir Starmer. He's worse than Tony Blair, because at least Tony Blair was only an employment lawyer, right? And that freedom of information they're not letting us access university information. There's loads of information online where you've got to be members of institutes or join up or sign up. Any information that's worth having, right, is not easy to get. And then they moved the Parliament archives exactly after the pandemic so that it's actually been delaying us getting hold of really important information that we need from Parliament because the records have been moved, right? That was strategically planned. Tony Blair was not a human rights lawyer, and he didn't lead the CPS. So even though he's meant to be one of the masterminds behind this whole China government thing for the UK, which, I don't know why he just didn't go to China and live there and, But, you know, obviously Bill Gates is wanting to do it for the whole world now, right? Starmer is worse than Blair because he's actually he's acting in government now against everything that he was meant to represent. And all of his work when he was a barrister, supposedly meant to be a human rights act advocate, and they're putting all these acts of law through which totally violate it, which is their test, right? Because if they can get all these ridiculous abortion laws and, you know, assisted suicide through, past the right to life, then and we can't stop them, or we didn't notice they were doing it, then that's a test that, you know, we've got the Eurovision, that we're thick, we can't see what's going on, and we're pretty dumb. And, you know, the Americans really pulled one over on us when they do all these submit, consent, accept, and then get our data and use it for all these other parties. And all these parties are going to all be players in these, how these governments are going to run. That's what Jeff Bezos wanted to do. He wanted to be one of the main commanders of the whole medical part of it, knowing everyone's medical information and holding everyone's medical information, you know, and profiling everyone, and, you know, and there are a lot of strategic elements in that as well. So, you know, if there was one thing which any civilization, looking at China now, you know, what else is there? Is there anything you can do that is different to what they're doing in China? You know, it's about time that we got rid of these billionaires, these ridiculous billionaires and trillionaires, right? If there's anything that the human race could ever do that would be worth doing, which could actually stop a lot of these problems that we've had to face without, you know, hindering any, you know, nothing stopping universities of technology, right, is to get rid of these billionaires and make that illegal, like Gates, Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, look at these people. They're already building nuclear bunkers. So, like, you know, it's like, you know, let me see your poker face, let me see your war face, you know. Mark Zuckerberg, well, you can't see my war face, I've built a fucking bunker, you know. These people are planning for wars. And they're planning for forcing us. They want their platforms to be popular, and they want everyone in the whole country to go on them, and then they want everyone in the whole country to give up their rights, and then you don't have any rights, even though it's set in law. I don't know how anyone can believe that these people are sane. Zuckerberg is not normal. He hasn't benefited society. The BBC came on and said, oh, create a digital profile on Facebook. And everyone just went, hey, I'll do that then, you know. They might have said, oh, you know, everyone going all the way to fucking Fiji or something, right? You know, there have been benefits from Facebook groups, but how they're managed and the governance models of them, how it affects, it's very anti-social. In a way, it's social, but there's very strong anti-social aspects of it, or authoritarian aspects. It'd have been better if it was all, you know, positive. There's a lot to learn from Facebook groups, but only because other people have come together and put stuff up on there, right? And it's just been a little bit more convenient. And it just happens that when we're learning all these things from these groups now, people actually are educating themselves more than there's actually been a increase in education without even having to go to school, you know. But it's not actually about knowledge and education now. The government don't actually want us to be cleverer than them, right? But actually, a lot of people are cleverer than the MPs now. And that's the problem. The MPs want people to agree with them and want them to do their ideas and plans that they want to do, and their parties. What they don't want is the whole population just to become really, really intelligent and clever, even more clever than the MPs, right? Because then, we're meant to be telling the MPs what to do anyway, right? They're not even meant to have their own ideas, really. They're supposed to be acting on statistics and majority. But it doesn't seem that that's the case with political parties. We need to make these political parties illegal for a start and get rid of all this reform nonsense, all these electoral adverts and blah, 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 you know? Because the political parties, I think, are one of the main problems. And then you've not been getting fair trials in the councils. You've not really been getting proper fair civil trials either. But they don't want people. They don't want people to make the decisions. They're not. It's called democracy, but it's not really democratic. It's about, you know, the people who are going in there are really wanting to get elected because they think that they know best. We really want people to get elected who are just good people, like they've got skills with people, they've got skills with groups, they've got listening skills, they've got like the best MP that you want is one who's very eager and keen to listen to everyone and, you know, see what the majority of people want. And he doesn't have his own ideas or any political party ideas. But that is the last thing that the main parties actually want, and the last people they want to stand for their party, because they want their MPs to be whipped and vote their way in Parliament. So the first thing what we need to do is get rid of political parties and make them illegal. And the other thing to do is get rid of billionaires and make that illegal. And if we can do those two things, then you know, Donald Trump's not going to be dragged kicking and screaming from that, because you're going to make a lot of money, making a lot of money, making a lot of money, a lot of money. You know, life's not about making a lot of money. People can make scientific developments without having massive amounts of money from like one or two donors who are the ones who give all the commands and have the say, rather than the people directing it. That's why they say a lot of the technology is being corporately directed, like these mobile phones, you know? If the people and the voters and the electors had been deciding how these mobile phones develop, we wouldn't have been giving away information to third parties. We wouldn't have had all these policies, submit, consent, accept. You know, it might have still had a video camera on it. It might have still had a camera, but it would have been, you know, not going towards this kind of the government of China model where, you know, but that I think that's the only, it seems to be the only way that the government think that they can get everyone to do what they want, which is to have every one of these regimes. But I think that the motivations behind it are arising from these attitudes that Mark Zuckerberg, and maybe not Mark Zuckerberg originally, because they did sort of have it in forums. I was getting bullied quite a lot in forums because admins always abuse their powers, you know. They're not trained in rights. A lot of these people were in charge of forums or moderators, and some of them didn't even have the same opinions. They weren't properly trained to deal with other people, you know. There was a lot of abuse going on. Maybe, you know, when all these forums and then the platforms would have been conceived and invented, everyone maybe should have been equal from the start. And maybe they should have voted on, you know, if someone's removed from a group or not, or if something's blocked or removed, rather than just having these admins who we don't even really know who they are. They're not accountable to the law. We don't know what country they're in, you know. And, you know, I think that it's led to this very authoritarian streak going through the whole lot of it. And it's gone right up to the government, and they really, really like it, and they're really keen to get the whole country run by that model, which is what China's like, this authoritarian streak. And it's actually an error. It's erroneous in the concept from the start, right? You don't have an administrator in a group or forum. You have, like, everyone has a vote on it. And it's just how you design and make the programs, you know? Because some of these people aren't even accountable for their actions, you know, and they don't even know the law or rights. But yet, these corporate entities who own the platforms are giving them power. They're giving them executive powers, which aren't even powers in law, you know. And this is when you get these people actually with like zero, maybe even the New York zero tolerance pitch helped towards that attitude, Maybe everyone was sort of like on this zero tolerance. But then the irony is that these parties, particularly Ed Davey, right, there's like, no, they would like people to understand each other, question them about their behaviour. We were meant to have all these universities that are studying behaviour, blah, 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 right? But, it's like speech to the hand because the face ain't listening. It's totally wrong. If you want society to get along with each other, it's knowledge and education and understanding people's behaviour and then knowing how to manage people and knowing how to speak to them and understand them, or if they're not being nice or if they're being peculiar or whatever it is, understand why, find out why, understand how. But what the culture that they've been creating with these fences around schools and, locks on school gates and all that is just like, they're reporting people in now just for delivering places, or there's some suspicious behaviour, it turns out they're not. That was a waste of police time. They don't seem to be able to assess what's going on, even to look at something and know what's happening, which to me ties into this kind of like all kind of basis that I said before, that, does anyone know what the fuck's going on? Seems to be that they don't know what's going on. And this is a shrinking of the consciousness, a shrinking of care, and, more of the speech than because face ain't listening, the slightest thing. It's the wrong direction to go in, and it's actually all been done because of how the technology has been introduced and developed, and these big companies just got very, very greedy. They wanted to make more and more money than they could. I'm Sergey Brin, now I've got Alphabet, now I'm doing everything. He's got every experiment going under the sun. He's got his window down, the sun's up, he's got shades on, he's got his arm out of the window. Life's going great for me and Jeff Bezos. Everything's going good for us. Well, people are buying it, they must like it. Well, yeah, maybe they might be addicted to your products, but, then there's just like all the rubbish and junk everywhere. As long as Jeff Bezos gets his rocket to the moon, he's not bothered, is he? As long as he's got his Lord of the Rings series or whatever. These people are in the minority, but they've managed to get all their minions under these policies, agreements, and all these other things, and they've been helping them out doing it. So I don't know what else to say, but the Human Rights Act is a big part of it. I think the Human Rights Act was kind of like a big red herring, and it was like a test to see if they could get all those things off the checklist past us, which they have been doing. This is the thing, they've been doing it. The big American social media platforms have been doing it, and in fact the mobile phone itself, really. And most of those are from China and Japan. So they've been getting them. They've been getting their goals past us, basically. And now Starmer is doing it blatantly when he's going to be the human rights lawyer with his freaking ridiculous assisted suicide bills and his ridiculous abortion things. There is no right for a life force. They're severely and detrimentally. And where does it end? I don't know how someone who supposedly worked using the Act could even, advocate any of those laws in Parliament, And they're meant to be Labours. They're meant to be the Labour parties.